Ironically, I think it's the best work I've created, and I have the biggest audience I've ever had. But I have not figured out a way that I can afford to live now.
My guest today is a personal finance writer, author, and entrepreneur who spent 10 years building a six-figure business from scratch, starting with $450 a week on a Broadway tour and working her way up through survival jobs, copywriting gigs, and relentless hustle. And this episode is a little different because Stefanie isn't here to tell you she has it all figured out. She breaks down how she walked into writing her book, The Ambition Penalty, with over $100,000 saved in her business account, and how after 2.5 years, she's mostly gone through it.
At that point, I think I had over $100,000 in a business checking account, which feels insane. If you told me that, I would say that's crazy. And now I think it wasn't enough.
She shares what her business revenue looked like at its peak and what it looks like now.
And this time I had faith and I had $100,000 in a checking account. But as that number goes down and down and down, I am really thinking about, okay, like how much more can I afford to have faith?
Plus the research behind the ambition penalty, how women's ambition is weaponized against them, what the motherhood penalty costs women over a career, and why doing all the right things still doesn't close the gap.
Why are women more ambitious than ever, more educated than ever, more doing all the right things than ever, and still not better off?
And the mindset shift that's changed how she thinks about money, seasons of life, and what it actually costs to do work that matters.
Time, more than anything, is not guaranteed. I just cannot defer to a future that may not ever come.
I'm Ashley, certified financial planner, founder of The Fiscal Femme, and I'm asking the question everyone is already wondering. How do people actually afford their lives? This is How Do You Afford This? Welcome to the show, Stefanie.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So excited to have you. You've run your own business for 10 years. You're a new author of The Ambition Penalty. You're raising a child in NYC. Like, how do you afford this?
That is a really good question. I will tell you, full disclosure, I don't know that I am. And I want to we can talk more about in detail, but just to put it out that I am not in a season of having it figured out. And I think that is something we don't talk about enough. But I can afford this season because I prepared for it.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like that like you said, it's not something that we talk about and it's so relatable and so many of us feel that. I want to dive into the numbers like you said, but give us like the elevator pitch on the ambition penalty. What is it?
Yeah.
How did you experience it yourself?
Sure. So I had been reporting on personal finance for a long time, and you know what this is like. We have these steps we're supposed to follow. And if we just do these things, we're supposed to get these outcomes. And particularly when it comes to the workplace, I was looking at women's experiences with pay negotiations and leaning in and speaking up and asking for more. And I saw that even when they implemented all of the best practices and did all of the right things, they still were not getting the same outcomes as their male peers. And this has been really striking for me. And I know, you and I are very similar age, to see this playing out among my peers, the girls and the women who grew up on that 90s girl power messaging. We came into the workforce in the peak lean in era. And now we're aging into midlife and what should be our peak earnings years, facing the same gender pay gaps as our predecessors. And I wanted to understand, okay, what is creating this stalled outcome? Why are women more ambitious than ever, more educated than ever, more doing all the right things than ever, and still not better off? And so this book is a real deep dive into the research. And one of the key mechanisms that I point out for locking this inequality in place in spite of women doing all of these things is what I call the ambition penalty, where women's ambition is weaponized against them. Men's career ambitions are often rewarded, celebrated, supported. They get more mentorship. They get more pay raises. They get more pay and promotions, leadership opportunities. For women, it's certainly helpful in some cases to have ambition and you might get some rewards, but you also might be judged and you also might be labeled difficult. And statistically, you're more likely to not just not get what you ask for, but face backlash and penalties for asking in the first place. And with that gender dynamic, you can essentially recreate the same inequality across gender identity, even as more explicit barriers to women's participation fall away. So that's what the book
Mm,
is about.
that very important. And as you're talking about it, right, I'm like nodding. I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And there's a lot of it that you feel and
Mhm.
that I felt coming up in my career. There's a lot that probably I didn't even feel like it was even just so baked in. And then I felt like there was a big jump becoming a parent, becoming a mother. And that's when it was like smacked me in the face.
Mhm.
Are you seeing that in your research too, that there is a difference as women become mothers?
100%. There is often this sense that gender inequality makes sense, or that's what people say. Uh,
Right.
and they point to motherhood as the reason. And it's just such a bizarre claim to me because nobody says that about fathers. So, what we're really talking about is not a transition to parenthood. We're talking again about how the same experience is completely rewarded or penalized differently depending on the person, depending on the identity of the person, not their performance, not their commitment, not their ambition, not their capability, but their identity. And that is
Mm.
the problem. And so, for men to be rewarded with more opportunity at work, and more promotions and pay when they become fathers, while women are more likely to be held back, no matter how committed they are, no matter how much they continue to engage in the workplace. One of the most fascinating things is mothers who are aware of the fact that they're going to be judged as and be seen as less competent and committed after having children will often try to push back against that stereotype. And because of that, they will be then punished for being seen as not warm enough. And how now you're such a bad mom. And then they'll be held back at work because they're not aligning with that stereotype of being a good mom. So it's literally like there's no way to win, no matter how you play it. And I would say that parenting really, really turns up the dial on
Mm.
all of those gendered stereotypes.
That makes perfect sense. Take us back to the beginning of your career. You
Mm.
started on Broadway. Like,
Mm.
walk us through that pivot to personal finance. And if you're up for it, like, what were you earning at each stage along the way?
Yeah, my first job out of college, I was on a tour of the musical Cinderella. I had a double major in psychology and theater, and I was so interested in both of those things. And I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I'd love to tell stories. And I wanted to understand why people did what they did. So it felt like the right kind of combination of things. And it's really served me well through all the career pivots in retrospect. But I started on this tour and I was making, I think it was $450 a week. And because it was a tour, I was also given per diem. So I had no cost of living. And what that basically enabled was for me to save my entire salary. And so by the time that ended, all I had done was put my income, even though it wasn't much, towards my financial goals. And I basically had no cost of living. But as I quickly learned, I had gotten very, very lucky when I had a job immediately out of college as someone working in the arts, and that is not typical, and it doesn't usually stay that way even when you do get a win. And so I found myself in this pattern for years of having a job and then coming home and being like, oh gosh, and I would collect unemployment, but it was like a couple $100s a week, and so then I would look for part-time work. I would babysit, I would work at restaurants, like literally every kind of stereotypical starving artist job you can imagine I've done. I've been a personal assistant. And the hard part was you had to do that at the same time as auditioning, which is basically a full-time job in and of itself, or at least it was at the time. Things have changed a lot since since 2008, 2009. This is a long time ago. And I just constantly felt, even when I would get a win, I would be on a show, I'd be on a tour, I would just feel like It was always a matter of time until I was not earning enough money again. And even when I got bigger and bigger shows, I wasn't even earning enough money on those shows. And what I realized was that there was a difference between having a job I loved and having a lifestyle I loved.
Mm.
And that really became the incentive for me to become basically obsessed with money and how to get more of it, how to have more stability, how to have more of money facilitating a lifestyle I love. Hopefully, that still has work I love, but just maybe in a more sustainable way. And I think that's what really got me not only interested in personal finance as a hobby, but then like also bringing the psychology, bringing the storytelling, bringing all of this kind of like elements that I had fostered through my education and my early career into my interest with money. And that's where I really started, blogging. And then I wound up taking on copywriting, became my survival job. I was writing like $20, $30 blog posts for this is like the era of fintechs where everybody wanted to start ranking for certain keywords. And so every startup needed something on their website about like 5 ways to build your credit score. And I wound up, that was my survival job for a while. And it went from like being able to charge $30 to $100 for a piece to $200 to $500. And what I quickly started to realize throughout that process was like, oh, wow, it wasn't so much my work that was changing as opposed to the kinds of clients who had the money to pay me more. So even if I was creating the same product, it really became clear in terms of income and being able to really afford anything. I needed to scale income in a meaningful way because I couldn't cut my lifestyle back any more than I already had. And the way to scale my income wasn't necessarily by doing more. It was just about finding the better places to do it.
Getting paid more for the things you were doing.
Correct.
Brilliant. And so from there, so copywriting, and then how did it stick with that? You just were getting paid more for writing?
For a
Or were
long
there other ways you
time.
earn money?
For a long time, yeah, that was my primary gig, and now we're really going back in through the memory bank here for so you'll forgive me if some of these details are fuzzy. But I think, alongside the copywriting, I was also doing writing on my own. I didn't have
Mhm.
a way of monetizing it, but I was creating my own content. And again, this is like very early social media days. Like I think Instagram had just come out. But I really didn't understand what it would mean. And now I know what it means to be able to like talk about money and career and all that stuff on Instagram. But at the time I didn't have a clue. I'm like, what am I supposed to take a picture of? Like my quarters, this one we still had change, right? It was strange. So
Yes.
I was kind of like long form blogging, but the other thing I really did a lot during that time was in addition to doing my own creating and my own copywriting was I went to everything. And this is what still when stuff was in person a lot. I lived in New York City, and the great benefit of that was that there was always something to go to. There were always people coming through town, always people to meet, and I just went like probably 3, 4 nights a week. If someone had a book coming out, and as I started writing, I started meeting people online, and then I would go show up in person at like their book events, or if there was like a conference. I think the first conference I went to, I applied for a scholarship. Like I scaled these things up in low stakes ways, either trying to do something locally or through scholarships or through relationships that would enable me to do them. Like, so I didn't have to make a huge investment. Like I was always looking for ways to build and grow, not necessarily income short term, but more like the things that could potentially lead to income and do it as low cost as possible. And then over time, as I started to have enough content and I had enough clients and I had enough relationships, people came to me and they said, oh, do you want to do this like video for us, or do you want to host this panel for us, or when you would you, oh, I really liked your take on this topic, would you like to speak about this? And I think what it really taught me that I still think about, I use today, which is basically I think about my work as creating a proof of concept of what I want to do that I hope people will eventually pay me for. One of the things I realized afterwards when people were coming to me after I started doing like speaking in television, after a while, they'd be like, how do you do that? And then I'd go to their websites and I would not see like any of them on camera, or I wouldn't see anything about them speaking. And they're like, well, I don't have any clients. How am I supposed to get them? It feels like a catch-22. And it's like, well, you kind of have to find a small scale way of creating the thing you eventually want people to pay you for. And it doesn't necessarily have to be something, especially now with the tools of the phone. Like you can kind of create a proofs of concept of like a mini TV show or like a talking head concept or whatever it is. I know you've done this, like of what eventually you want people to come to you for. And I think that has consistently been one of the things that's allowed me to align what I want to create with the income I want to have. Although I will say, like, caveat for this moment, because I haven't figured it out right now. But but it has worked, for most of the course of my career as I've pivoted into this self-employment journey.
I it. So it sounds like showing up, like you're talking about the
Yeah.
events, going to, you're meeting people, you're putting yourself out there. And I love that, the creating the thing you want, because then you have evidence of it. People can see what it looks like
Mhm.
versus they have to come up with that concept or that idea or really visualize what it is.
Yes, 100%. And even it's interesting even now, anytime I play with a new format, and I'm always thinking about like, what's the new kind of thing that's resonating and does it align with, what resonates for me? And if I find something, I always want to try to play around. I always want to test it. And I'm always surprised that more people are watching than I realize, because it'll come up in conversations later on and they'll be like, oh, yeah, like I saw you doing this and I saw you doing this. And I was like, really? I thought nobody was watching that. It's like 5 likes and my mom. And yet, that's the way this stuff scales over time. But I think when you can really like make it as easy as possible for people to want to work with you. That's one of and I don't mean that in a way of like setting yourself up to be exploited. But anytime I've been like trying to break into a new space, I'm always thinking about like, how do I make this easy for them to say yes to? That they don't have to imagine anything, that I'm just coming or I'm creating out in public in ways that feel like this someone will see it and be like, that's exactly what we need. And I think that's really proved quite y- strat- strategically useful and successful most of the time.
I think that's incredible advice. Curious because you've alluded twice to the finances of right now. Like,
Mm.
where are you in that process? Are you putting it out there? Like, this work is what you want to be working on, but now you're waiting for the monetization to
Yeah.
come to fruition.
Well, as you mentioned, I have this book out, and the other piece of this book project was that I was pregnant when I sold the book proposal. I was 8 months pregnant, and they said, how long is it gonna take you to write this?" And I said, "I don't know. I've never had a baby before." So it wound up. My daughter is 2.5, and my book came out yesterday. So when I signed that book proposal, I was in good shape. I I not because, like, I had a huge advance, but because I had generated enough revenue for, like, the previous 5 years that I had been able to set a lot of money aside, and I think when I realized that I wanted to work on a book and I was going to have a baby, I was aggressively setting money aside, and I will say that at that point, I think I had over $100,000 in a business checking account, which feels insane because, like, why would you have that much money sitting and checking? Like, if you told me that, I would say that's crazy, and now I think it wasn't enough. So, to go back to your question.
You knew
Yeah,
something and you
no.
knew.
I knew something. Well, I knew it was gonna take me a long time to do to write the book, and I knew it was gonna be expensive to have a kid. And I didn't know, I've never known as someone who's self-employed, especially within a media landscape that's always going through some kind of crisis, and especially within a broader political and cultural landscape where basically you can't say the word woman anymore. I just didn't know what the next iteration of all of that was going to be by the time I came out on the other side of this. But I knew I wanted to write this book, and I knew I wanted to be fully, fully, fully committed to making it the best I possibly could. And in some ways, it's been a success because I think I have done that. And ironically, I think it's the best work I've created, and I have the biggest audience I've ever had. But I have not figured out a way that I can afford to live now.
It's coming. It's coming. You've set it all up.
Yes, and part of me is like, I think I have to have faith. It has worked out before, but like, faith only takes you so far. I don't want to be naive about it too. In the past, I had faith and I had survival jobs, and this time I had faith and I had $100,000 in a checking account. But as that number goes down and down and down, I am really thinking about, okay, like, how much more can I afford to have faith? At what point is that balance going to go to zero? And how long do I wait? Like, what, and what is the survival job for me now? Even I don't even.
Right.
But in the past, I knew what the survival jobs was, but because there's been so much churn and change in the landscape over the years, and I haven't really had to think about it in a while. I've been very lucky. I don't quite know, and that's, like, really a lot I will say I do have a lot of anxiety and uncertainty, and I think I have a bigger appreciation for thinking about life in seasons as opposed to linearly. I think it's a big change from how I used to think about personal finance and, like, trying to, like, or even, like, FIRE, like, "You gotta save this much every year," and I'm like, "You know what? If the cost of being able to do what I've done in the last 2 years was, going through this pot of money, not contributing so much to the long-term investments, that was the cost, and I think that's something I'm willing to pay for, and I know that's gonna be different for everybody, but I just think, like, that flexibility has been very important for me,
Mhm.
and that grace, and, I think about this a lot when people ask about the cost of childcare and affording it or not, and it's like, at the end of the day, I need the childcare, and whether or not, like, it means that savings goes down sooner, or for someone, like, maybe it's even debt, like, I just wanna I have to think longer term. It's in a season of squeeze than
Mm.
the 1 or 2 years that I'm in this squeeze, and I think
Right.
if if I scale into, like, 20 years thinking down the line, I have to believe that is going to pay off for me.
It is so helpful to hear. And I just think such an education in strategic thinking around personal finance, because these are conversations that we don't see,
Yeah.
and how you're thinking. I think thinking about, okay, this was an investment essentially into the book, into creating a human
Um,
as well, and something that
100%. I mean,
yeah,
you know what I've been thinking about recently? I'm, like, thinking about how if I went back to school, it would have cost me more than this, you know?
yes.
And it would have taken that time, and I would have had to take on a lot of debt, and so, like, why do we not give ourselves that latitude for something else? And I also wanna say, like, I fully acknowledge that all of this is already from a position of such privilege, like, my daughter is really the only person who depends on me financially, and so that is also just, like, a huge privilege, and I'm partnered, the health insurance question is not a thing because I have it through my husband's job. So already, like, the baseline of squeeze is already so much less. Plus, I was making a lot of money for a long time. And so I just want to acknowledge that so much of this has also been facilitated by all of this extra cushioning. And even so, like, I do think it's interesting, like, it didn't save me. It didn't save me from the financial stress.
Yeah.
But, I'm
And it
just
sounds like
trying to be okay with that.
there was a strategic decision, but sometimes as we're going through, I love how you call it the squeeze, as you're
Mhm.
feeling the squeeze, even though you chose it
Yeah.
and you financially prepared for it, you still have to remember that you chose it and remind yourself, because it's not the natural way you're used to building, not
100%.
using.
Yeah, and I sometimes think, like, I always do find it interesting in conversations with people who are probably even higher earners than I was, and have even more savings, more cushion, like, more of, like, those pieces of privilege in place that they could afford to do things. I often find that they will get so locked into the plan that they aren't willing to kinda take those moments of risk or seasons, and I do wonder what the cost of that is. I've thought a lot about that in recent years, and I'm I'm glad that I did it. Like, again, I know that choice is not available to all people, but there are a lot of people who can make those choices who don't. And I think that's kind of a tragedy because, like, the thing about getting older, I'm sure, is like you've experienced this too, is like how little is guaranteed, and time more than anything is not guaranteed. And I just cannot defer to a future that may not ever come. I just have become more and more trying to optimize around living my life as it's happening. And that's hard when we're talking about finances, right? Because it is this push pull between the future and the present. But I am always struck by how often the people who can most afford to engage in a little bit more of that present optimization don't. And I think that's sad.
And I think it's worth it in and of itself for ourselves. But then when you're raising kids, you see what a finite time that is.
Mm-hmm. 100%. Like, I spend so much time with my kid. In fact, I probably spend more time than I need to than I even want to. I would pay for more childcare, not because I'm not obsessed with my kid, but I'm tired. I would like to take a nap.
I hear you.
But yes, one of the things I do so love is it has been a real forcing mechanism into the present, like nothing else, especially in the age of social media and being on our phones. Really having a kid who demands so much of you all the time just forces you into the moment you're in a way that is really special.
Yes. Curious. So, if there's been anything, it sounds like you were very prepared for the cost of raising kids in New York City. Anything that surprised you? And then, yeah, start with that.
It is surprising, I would say. I mean, listen, I had my kids, one child, at 37 years old. So I had seen a lot of people have kids, and I had been reporting on personal finance and women especially for years. So I had a lot of information. I was very well prepared. And yet, I am still struck by the extent to which accessing how much care I need. Like,
Mm,
even if my daughter is in full-time daycare, which she is now, like, the amount of other times I need to, like, even if I wanna go to a doctor, I can't take her. So I don't go. And I don't wanna schedule those appointments while she's in childcare because actually those are my work hours. And so any hour I don't w work, like, I'm trading. I guess it's like the Hunger Games of the trade-offs are just
yes.
so stark. And I have literally never, and if you told me this before I had my kid, I would not have believed you. I've never spent a day away from my kid. Like, she's in full-time daycare, but, like, there's not been a 24-hour period when I haven't been with her. And again, that's not necessarily by choice. Right now, I just had a book come out, like, I wanted to go on book tour. But I think where I've really struggled is I don't have excess cash flow, and I don't really have childcare outside of daycare hours, and my husband works at nights and weekends.
Mm,
So it really puts us in a position where, like, I don't have that kind of, like, "Well, what do you mean you can't do something? Can your partner watch him?" No, he can't. That's when he works.
when he's working.
Uh, so but it's really been like, well, now it means I'm not going on tour, and that's hard. Like, it's a hard thing for me because, like, as I mentioned, the thing that built my career was showing up places in person. I've worked on this thing that has been, like, I think the best thing I've ever done, and I can't kinda go out and spread it and do the thing, and that's what I wanna do. And everyone says, like, that's their favorite part of having their books out, is going to talk to people about it in the real world. And so, yeah, I've been thinking, "Okay, well, if I had one or the other in place, I could do it." Like, I could either, if I had all the money I used to make, I could throw money at the problem and solve this. And if I had childcare, like, my husband didn't work at night, then I could solve this. But having neither of those things in place, I can't solve for. And so, like, I just think the constraints, as much as I knew them, to experience them, and I guess to experience them every single day is
Mhm.
is really something. I think it's that the and you've had two kids, so it's even longer. I am struck by the marathon of that.
Right. the constraints are constraining.
Mm-hmm.
Also, when you said the doctor, I remember I had a lot of pain. And so I was supposed to go get an ultrasound to look and see if I had a cyst. And so I brought my son because he was with me. And they're like, all right, now we're going to do like a vaginal ultrasound. And I was like, no, we just going to have to skip that today. Because like, what am I going to do? Put him in a closet?
Oh my gosh.
So I didn't really want to go through that with my son in the room. But yeah, so I very much resonate with what you're sharing. And also the constraints and the risk. Like, yes, you could take more from that nest egg. You could
Yes.
put them, but like, what is the return on that? We're constantly having to really optimize for the ROI of our time and our money.
That is such a good point. Yeah, it's so much more about calculating reward in terms of time and money, which is hard because it's like it's like you have to think of it in levers, and it's like I took the lever to like create the thing, and it means that now that it's out there, I can't afford to like push it again. I could, but at what cost?
Right.
And I'd much rather like try to buy myself another month or two or whatever before I have to like find a full-time job, trying to get to a place where like, okay, I am able to rebuild my cash flow, and then I could go on tour, right? But it's hard. Everything is an ROI, and the trade-offs, my God, like I don't get haircuts because like if I am gonna go spend the time to do something, I am gonna go to the doctor, you know? So it's just
Right.
like
Health first.
everything is a trade-off.
Curious because you've mentioned high earning. Would you be open to sharing like what income levels we're talking about from like the trajectory of your career to now?
Yeah, before the book came out, I had my business revenue was like around $300,000, and I paid myself like $120,000, but then I also put $30,000 into a SEP IRA. So like it's $150,000, and then I ran like almost all my business expenses through the business. So like a lot of my costs were also defrayed because they were could be classified as business expenses. So it's like not a crazy amount of money, like yeah, $300,000 in revenue was a good amount, but it's not the same as $300,000 in income. But it just like wound up working out in a way that I had a lot of flexibility, and I really could kind of live how I wanted to. I'm not a very like the most extravagant thing about my life is that I live in New York City, and now I have a kid. But other than that, like I'm not too much on crazy spending. I did do two huge trips. One was a safari to South Africa, and one was basically a safari to the Galapagos. And those were like the
Wow.
two big things I ever really splurged on. And you know what? In retrospect, I'm so glad I did because I couldn't do those things now.
Right. Be a whole different ballgame to do
Mhm.
them.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. The thing is like I could do these things, but is it going to be fun? And how much money is it going to cost? And I don't think
Yes.
that makes sense right now.
Yes. And the stress of
And the
it costing.
stress. Yeah, exactly.
Given like the research you've done for your book, do you have an estimate of like what that ambition penalty has cost you over your career?
Oh, I mean, that's tough. I think there was a paper out from Bankrate, analysis from Bankrate recently that quantifies like the cumulative cost of the motherhood penalty over the course of a career path, and it's over $500,000. And that's under the assumption of like women, I don't know what assumption they had it at of women losing what percentage of their pay on average, but like my revenue dropped by 90%. I think I made $30,000 last year, like revenue. So like
Mhm.
that's not enough to do anything for me. Like in terms of I'm meaning like now I'm taking from the money I've accumulated that I'm not putting in to the money.
Right.
So yeah, I don't know that like I would classify that as ambition penalty in the traditional sense. Like it's not that my ambition was weaponized against me, but I guess it really was because you know what happened is I really changed my focus of my work to advocating on behalf of women's ambition.
Mm.
And that is a threat to the status quo. and and I am very frank, and I am very I communicate very directly, I think more than I used to, and I'm very forceful, and I use a lot of data to kind of call out unjust practices. And especially in the current environment, I think that's a risk to people who would used to hire me to like speak at their events, because like
Mm.
it's one thing to like talk about things that feel good, but if you're talking about like real accountability, that that often makes people uncomfortable. And I just think, to speak in this season about things that I think are really meaningful, I'm not optimizing for comfort anymore.
And there's a cost to that.
And there's a cost to that. So in that sense, yes, that is an ambition penalty. And that would 90% of my revenue in just 1 year. So goodness knows how much that's going to add up to.
The book has so much data, very
Mhm.
compelling data. Like, what are you telling your friends? Like, how are we taking this data and bringing it into the world to, like, what can we do? I know that that's not the main part of it, but that is a part that I go to when I'm like, I feel out of control with this.
I think the thing about the data is it helps people contextualize what they are experiencing within a broader experience of what is happening to all women and
Hmm.
all marginalized people. And I think that's actually more powerful than we might realize, because for so long we've been basically conditioned into this idea that all of our greatest barriers to opportunities are ourselves and what is happening within us. Like all of that whole just be more confident, just speak up, that really is a very individualistic framework of empowerment. And it's just that the biggest barrier to your advancement is you. And what I think the data really reveal is that the greatest barrier to your advancement is actually happening in the world around you. And what the data does is it flips the framework, and it allows people to stop internalizing blame for when they do face backlash, and to realize it wasn't just them. Because what happens is I interviewed a lot of women for this book, and when they would, like, let's say, negotiate their salaries, and I spoke to one woman, for example, who had a job offer rescinded for doing so. What she then did was blame herself. She said,
Mm.
"Well, I cannot believe this." Like, and this woman had followed all best practices. Like, she'd even taken a negotiation class in college. She was like following every HR leader on Instagram. And yet, like, she still automatically went back into, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Maybe I really don't deserve more. And that is what the data breaks us free from. Because what it
Mm.
does is help you understand that what you're experiencing is not a personal problem. It's part of a problem where in a system, if you have people who give the same inputs and they're getting outputs that differ depending on their identity, that is not has something that's wrong at the individual level. That is something happening within that system there. And so I think the data is very, very important in that way, because then we start sharing. Then we have a language for accountability. Then we can call this out as it's happening. And then we can come together, which I argue is the most important piece of the equation we've really been missing. Because I actually say, like, the message of this book is not for women to stop being to stop asserting themselves or to stop asking for more, to stop negotiating. No, no, no. Women need to continue doing that. But I think what we need to do is acknowledge that we do not have access to the same rewards, and we are much more likely to face backlash for asking. And the way in which we really change that is by coming together and sharing these stories. So we're not out here pretending like the only reason we're underpaid is because we didn't ask for it.
Mm. I'm thinking too, the to a negotiation that I had where the negotiation was actually successful, but at cost of the long-term relationship of my managers. And it was right when I quit my job, so it ended up being fine. But even to this day, I do think that the relationship is was hindered because I negotiated so hard, but I had to get the promotion and get the raise that I deserved. And so there it was like, what am I going to give up? And I do think there's so much power in knowing that it isn't you. You
Yes.
know, I think that's there it's so easy to blame ourselves, and people don't talk about money and definitely not earning. And so we're not swapping negotiation stories enough, or like what
Yeah.
happened to me to feel like it's so relatable. And so I think I 100% agree that the data and to put language to it, because
Yes.
like I said, at the beginning, you're like, something's going on, but how do you articulate that and in a way that others can understand and rally with you? And it's so, so important.
Yeah, and I'm glad you shared that story because that is such a common pattern too. It's like, oh yeah, even when it does work out, then there's still a long-term cost to be paid. Then you're labeled not a team player. And so when the mentorship opportunities are being doled out, when the advancements being doled out in the future, then you're going to pay that price. And I think that's one of the other things about this book is really kind of looking at how this experience on a daily basis compounds over the course of days, months, years, careers, such that you can have women coming out of college with more education than their male peers at parity at the entry level. And yet, immediately, no matter how far ahead women start, they will fall behind almost immediately. Not because they are doing something wrong, but because of this double standard.
So something you talked about was having another income in the household. Like partnership is a big deal when it comes to money,
Mhm.
sometimes for bad, right? Or for
Yes.
good. You're married.
Mhm.
How has being married changed your philosophy around money? How do you two handle money? Curious.
Yeah, I think my philosophy around money changes all of the time, and certainly being in a household is part of that. I we've always been basically of this mindset where we have a kind of joint pool of money where our joint expenses come out of, and then we also have our own accounts that we kind of just do whatever we want with, and then we have our own investments. And of course, like at the end of the day, we're married, so technically it's all everyone's. But there is just kind of this combination of, okay, what's the stuff we're doing together, and then, what we're doing on our own. And yet there's still like a lot of very clear expectations of like, even if I'm doing something on my own, I'm not going to spend an extraordinary amount of money without consulting with my husband about it, right? So it's not necessarily about having a very rigid system, but it's being very clear about certain boundaries or expectations or rules. And so those are the three things that I really, in terms of sharing money with people, boundaries, expectations, and rules are kind of the
Mhm.
philosophy I go by. But the thing I think I really came to when I was researching this book, more so than any personal experience, was just how much power dynamics are playing out within households. And I think that's under acknowledged in
Mm.
money conversations, honestly, all conversations. The extent to which most heterosexual households are deeply, deeply unequal is really not just about logistics or like how we're setting up our money or how we're like dividing our paid or unpaid labor. Is really about power dynamics because I talk a lot about this in the book, but one of the clearest example of this is even when women out earn men, even when they work longer hours, they still do more of the unpaid labor. They still
This one makes me
do
so mad.
more
So,
of still do many times more childcare, and, like, that has a real cost, there's a constraint, and so, like, basically the idea that it makes sense that women should always do more really falls apart pretty quick, and what you see instead is the manifestation of a power dynamic where men's time is prioritized, their access to professional opportunity is prioritized, their access to leisure, free time, which men have more of, is prioritized, and that comes at the direct expense of women. And I think this happens in households a lot because when you talk about our relationships, I talked before about how important it is to contextualize your experience within the broader experience of what is happening to all women. I think we don't do that when it comes
mm,
to our households. And so it's tricky because in any individual situation, you can always justify the inequality of the household. You can always be like, it makes sense in this scenario. But what you can't do is justify why it always plays out at a woman's expense to benefit men, like the vast majority of the time. And
regardless of what they're earning or what
regardless of
their
what they're
career.
earning or how much time they have or don't have or how healthy they are or how neurodivergent she is or like I just think of like all of the excuses that they come at me as I speak about this stuff, like, oh, it's always used in the same direction to justify why women should have less and men should have more. And that is something I'm really interested in exploring further of like, okay, what does that now mean for money? There has been a little bit of research on this. Like men are more likely to have power over the long-term financial decision making, even when women are like literally investment advisors. Like they have more specialized knowledge. But it's again, like there is this a lot of this gets attributed to like, again, women aren't confident or asserting themselves. But what I document in this book is like there's again very real costs when women do assert themselves, when they do assert their right to be equally involved and to have control and equitable control over these things. Like it's very striking. Like women can experience everything from greater emotional abuse to greater physical violence from male partners when they out earn their male partners, for example, or when they have greater wealth, or when they assert themselves into these like quote unquote traditionally masculine areas of competence. And so I don't think this is as easy as saying like women are just opting out. I think it's more of like a survival mechanism or like a way to keep peace in the relationship. But I think we don't really talk about it that way. And so it gets reduced to the language of logistics when I think we need to think a lot more again about power. And so I know that I haven't like fleshed out a whole framework for what this means in terms of like managing money on an individual basis, but I do hopefully I hope it gives people like a framework for like maybe thinking a little bit more deeply about these conversations.
Yes. And it'll be interesting to see the different ways that power gets reflected in the financial system of the relationship.
Yeah.
And to maybe just before you have that framework, just to notice like, do I feel disempowered? Do I not have agency in these different areas? Do I like not feel comfortable talking to our advisor, or do I not have access to funds? Or,
Mhm.
does he get to spend a lot on leisure, like a golf membership? And my thing, like something I've noticed is that a lot of times women feel responsible for all the kids spending.
Yeah, and
It gets
that is
bucketed under their problem,
and that shows up in the data. It's women's like no one compares the cost of childcare to men's incomes. It's like what men are not financially responsible for their children. These guys who want to beat their chest and call themselves providers. It's wild. But this shows up in the data too. Like basically the household needs are more likely to be seen as like a woman's responsibility and financially speaking, not just physically, not just like the labor speaking.
right?
So and what does that then cost, right? Like financial autonomy, even like you said, access to personal spending and leisure. We you said, you can have the guy spending on the golf. Well, no problem. But she wants to get a manicure and suddenly that's frivolous. That's a waste of money. This stuff is a lot more layered. And I am seeing that conversation, I think, shift. We certainly have seen with like the Belle Burden Stranger's memoir coming out
Mm,
and her story of financial abuse. I think even just seeing the amount of people who are now talking more about this stuff because of that one book, I think speaks to the real power of recognizing how much these dynamics are not like completely personal or individual. They're actually shaped by these much broader ideas, just like the workplace and the responses to what we do in the workplace are much shaped by these broader ideas of what power should look like and what leadership should look like and who's allowed to have access to it and who isn't.
right. Yes. And what do you like, given everything you know and all the
Mm.
data and all the research you've done, what do you hope your daughter learns from you about money?
Yeah, the thing I always think about as a parent is what I model for her in terms of what not necessarily even money specifically, like, and I'm sure that will change as she's older and has a concept of what money is, but like,
Right. She's young. She's very young.
but just in terms of like she sees me spend time
Mm,
and what she sees, what kinds of responsibilities she sees me taking on and what kind of responsibility she sees her father taking on. And what she learns is shared instead of like one person's jobs or another's, or like what sacrifices there are to be made and hopefully shared, as opposed to being one person's or another sacrifices to make. Like at this point, I think a lot about power and making sure that we model a household dynamic where it is give and take and not just like a feel good quote, but is something that is actually reflected in their household. And I don't have it perfect. Statistically, nobody does.
Right. Right. Because you're
But
fighting against headwinds. It's not
yes,
like,
right. Even if you did have like the most equitable partner, will say like you're still in the context of a world in which like the world outside of you is trying to pull you back into inequality because the school is going to call you mom, even if only dad is listed first on that contact sheet, right? So they're trying
100%.
to pull you apart. In the workplace, when he gets promoted and he gets raises and you get penalized, like you're trying to keep it equitable and yet it's pulling you apart. So I just think there's a lot of the times where this happens and we wind up kind of like explaining it away or brushing it under the rug. And what my approach has been is like, listen, I don't have being completely equitable figured out, but what I won't do is pretend it's okay or make sense. And I think
Mm.
that's an important thing for me to always keep in dialogue and model for my kid.
And she'll see you in the process of it. And it's true. I am horrible at answering my phone. I don't like notifications. I
Oh
get
my
so
God, same.
distracted. And my husband he's watched things. He's great for the school calls, the doctor calls. And so often they still call me and
Of
then they
course.
call him next but I don't answer. So, because I really don't. But to think about, that's one microcosm, like the
Tiny
many
bit,
things that
right?
happen over and over to keep. And I think too that is important to keep in mind with a partner, because even with the best of intentions, they're encountering those headwinds. And so a little bit, to think of it as more of a partnership versus sometimes I'm just very angry about the inequity and how much we have to fight for it, where, he's a teammate in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Though, it is hard. The thing about the doctor, when my daughter was born, she's connected to my chart account. Like so all her medical records, all of her everything is automatically connected to me. And I cannot figure out how to change that. Like we're both listed on there, but because she was connected through my chart, I can't figure out how to change it. They won't let my husband change it because it's on my chart. And it's like, okay, now 2.5 years later, here we are. And it's like the way in which I think we have really underestimated the way in which like the world defaults to trying to disempower women. And I think the only way you can counteract that is not to shoot for an equal relationship. It's to shoot for a relationship that prioritizes women's needs.
What's an example of that? Like,
I think an
to,
example of that is not trying to go for a 50-50 split of like household labor, for example, or like including the paid labor. I think it's like if you try to aim for like a 70-30 division of labor or 80-20 division of labor with men carrying 80% of the load, you'll probably get to 50-50.
oh, I see what you're saying. Got it.
Mm-hmm.
So you over-index
Mm-hmm.
for just the natural things that come into play
Yeah.
that will make it more equal.
Well, the two things. The one is that men have a tendency to overestimate how much they contribute. So, like, something like over 80% of men in heterosexual partnership already think they're doing their fair share when, according to, like, the tracking data, fewer than 7% of households have an equitable division of labor. So, it's like 93% of households don't. And even that, like, that's only, like, physical tasks. That's not even, like, mental load. It's not everything else. And then the second piece is like what we've been talking about. Even if you got to total equity in your home, the world is still pulling you apart. And so to counteract against both of those things, I think you have to try to overshoot it so much. And I mean, and when I talk about this, like again, I'm not just talking about household labor or like paid labor because that's the thing that we experience. It's so clear, but it's also like how interests are prioritized, like how finances are prioritized, whose needs are going to be supported and served. If we're moving for one person's careers at the expense of another's, overwhelmingly it happens to advantage men.
Mm-hmm.
And even when women earn more, and even when it doesn't make sense, right? And so I just want people to think a little bit more expansively about those power dynamics in all of these different ways.
Like even just prioritizing your joy, you're getting
Mm-hmm.
your
Your
spa day with
time,
your
your
friends or
leisure.
whatever. Yes.
Yes.
I've never heard someone say that, but so thank you. It makes so much sense. I love that. What's something about your money, and this could be your career, your power dynamic that people would never guess?
Something about my money in my life that people would never guess. That's a good question.
I mean, I almost skipped it just because the 100 grand in your business account that has
Yeah.
funded your book and essentially your first 2.5 years with your child. I think that was something that people might not guess that you.
Yeah. I mean, that has definitely been the biggest thing, and I have wanted to talk more about that, once I get through this season. But and I will say, like, I didn't not have any revenue during that time. It just like it wasn't enough to
Right.
to cover my expenses. I think in terms of like money that people would never guess. I mean, I like do not spend any money on personal care. Maybe that is obvious to people if they spend enough time with me, but I think and I'm not saying that like from a place that I'm proud. It's just I think I have a lot of executive dysfunction, very hard for me to concentrate and focus. So like the idea of like spending time to go to a store to like buy to like get a haircut or buy makeup, like it just never is a priority. Never.
It's not worth the work, the planning, the,
I
the
like
functioning.
as I've been on like doing all these podcasts, I've been like trying to like go through bags of like old makeup that I have like hidden back in my apartment somewhere, and it's probably like so unsanitary. And so it's just, again, it's not like a point of pride that like I'm above it. I'm not. Like I'm still wearing makeup, right? It's just that like it never winds up being the thing of like in the list of things that I want to do or want to spend money on. It's like always at the bottom.
And you look great. So that's
That's
also makes it
lovely. Thank
surprising.
you.
Yes.
Thank you. But if we were in person, you would see my grays popping up much more.
What are you working on affording next? We talked about like how you're affording this season, but what is the next thing that you're thinking about affording?
The rest of my life.
The next seasons of the life.
I mean, really, yeah. I think like I want to be able to continue to afford doing work that I think is meaningful and important. And yeah, that is what I've done in this season. But I that is something I want to make sure I can continue to do in a sustainable way. And previously, it was a little easier for me to figure out how to swing that financially. So I think like now it's the same goal, but it's just a little bit more challenging to figure out how it's going to happen.
You've added a new expense layer,
A
the
big
children.
one. My life has never been more expensive.
Well, thank you so much, Stefanie. Congratulations on your new book. Everyone should go out and get it. I'm so inspired by how you're using data to help women and the world better understand the ambition penalty. And thank you for this behind the scenes look into how you make your business, raising your child, all of it work. Where can
Sometimes.
everyone find you? Yeah. Ish. No.
Ish.
Where can everyone find you and support your work?
Yeah, my Instagram handle is Stefanie O'Connell. I have a newsletter called Too Ambitious, and the book is The Ambition Penalty, How Corporate Culture Tells Women to Step Up and Then Pushes Them Down wherever you get your books.
Amazing. Everyone go follow Stefanie, get her book, subscribe to the newsletter, and thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to How Do You Afford This? If you love this inside look into how people are actually affording their lives, follow and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have new episodes dropping every week, and trust me, you do not want to miss them. And if you're enjoying the show, it would mean the world to me if you left a review. It takes just a minute and it helps more people find the show, which helps me on my mission to make crafting a wealthy life more accessible, more transparent, and a whole lot more fun. See you next week.